What's up? What's up? What's up? What is good, advocates out there? Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins, host of The Art of Advocacy. By the way, if you are a podcast listener, make sure that you subscribe as well and follow the Leading Equity Podcast. Every Monday, we got a new episode. Of course, every Thursday, we go live. I bring on a great guest. I'm really excited for today. Now, of course, I got to send you the reminder. As always, today's episode live stream is brought to you by Leading Equity, becoming an advocate for all students. It's been a great week. I was in Salt Lake City, Utah. Shout out to anybody in Utah, recording the audio. So I spent 4 days over the last couple weeks recording the audio version of the book. So if you're an Audible person, it's coming out very soon. You can get that copy as well. But of course, if you're like me, I like the physicals as well. Grab the book. All right, today's going to be a really good episode. Now, if you are an educator and you're an educator who's working with students that are different than you, okay? Now, I spent 4 years. Wait, no, I lie. I spent maybe 6 years, around 6 years working on a reservation in various capacities. And best believe the students did not look like me. However, I enjoyed my time. Sadly, I decided to move on and do solo with Leading Equity Center. That's the only reason why I moved on. But I do miss the school. I miss the kids. But just connecting with students is really important, especially when we do not share the same background. And so we have Miss Elissa. Elissa is, oh my gosh, see, that's what happens when you go live. Miss Elissa, oh my God. I will get it. Miss Elissa Gong is here today. And she's going to share with us 4 tips. All right, 4 tips for you today. So as a matter of fact, let me read her bio real quick. Shout out to anybody that's watching. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're coming from. Love to see who's out there. But Miss Gong has been teaching high school science in the suburbs of Chicago for 20 years. She is a certified biology teacher with a master's in education. She's qualified, certified to be here today. And I'm really excited to have her on. And we're going to welcome her in just a moment. Like I said, feel free to say hello, those who are watching. Because I'm excited. We're going to bring her on. Let's bring her on right now. Should we bring her on? Yeah, let's bring her on. Okay, good. Thank you for saying that. We're bringing her on. Without further ado, thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. I thought I was going to lose you because I was struggling to say your name, and I was going to stand in it, and I did not want to give it up. So Miss Elissa Gong, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. And you did great with my name. It is an adventure sometimes. But yeah, we all have our things.
We all do.
Yeah. So thank you for that, and thank you for trying so hard, and you got it. You nailed it.
I talk about it all the time, the importance of saying names. I know it's very important. People mess my name up, especially my last name, a lot. So I try to put some respect on folks' name. Now, Elissa, it's good to have you on, and I know who you are, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Sure. Thank you. This is my 20th year teaching high school out of the suburbs of Chicago. Just like you said, I am a certified science teacher. I generally teach biology. I have a master's in education. I'm also special ed certified and EL endorsed. And the last several years in our school, our EL or English learner population has grown significantly. So I've transitioned actually to working 100% of my day with our EL student population.
Wow. Okay. Well, good for you. And that's some really good work that you're doing. Now, when you say EL, because there's different ELs. There's English language learners. There's expeditionary learning as well. Tell me a little bit more as far as when you're referring to EL.
Yes. So this is our English learners, which they're called emergent multilinguals. Historically, it was ESL, English as a second language. Yeah. A lot of educational, schools, states, they've moved away from that term because a lot of students have multiple languages and English is not necessarily their second. So it's presumptuous for us to assume that because they're learning English, it must be their second language. So they're learning English. They're learning, in many cases, kids were born here, grew up here. They've been here for a long time. And by here, I mean the United States, but they're still acquiring academic English to be as successful as their same age peers with the same cognitive skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Based off of that, it sounds like you might have some experience working with students in various populations, and diversity is very important to you. And I'm so excited to talk about today's chat. And let's get started, because you prepared 4 strategies or 4 tips. Now, folks who are watching, you know what I always say, I'm not a checklist guy. I don't believe that you do these 4 things or you do this 5 things, whatever it is, that you will automatically be certified equity advocate and you're ready to go. There's still more work to do. But today we're going to share some strategies, just 4 tips that we have available. And I'm really excited. So why don't you start us off with the first one that you have?
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of these, they take a while to practice at, because if we look at the face of educators across the United States, there's a lot of white people, and the majority are white women. So when we're walking into classrooms where we don't match our students, we have to know that students will not assume, and we should not assume about each other. So one thing to consider, and this takes some practice, everyone needs to blow off some steam sometimes if you're having a hard day or you had a rough class. But then when we're talking with our peers about other students that we're working with or shared students that we have in common, is to use an empathetic lens. So even when we're sitting in the teacher cafeteria, I do blow off steam as well, like everybody does. But we have to use empathy when we're using our words to describe our classes, our students, and the work that we're attempting to do in class. So we want to use. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So when you're saying empathy, tell me a little bit more, because I think the language that we utilize is very important. And unfortunately, sometimes we get frustrated and we'll say some things about our students that we wouldn't say in front of our students, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So could you maybe give me some examples of what that could look like when it comes to being empathetic with the words that we're utilizing?
Sure. I mean, we want to use humanizing language. We're putting students first in what we're talking about. And we need to be careful that we're not othering kids in the way we're describing, like those kids, or, well, the kids in that class or the kids at that level. We don't want to use terms like low or something to indicate like a can't situation where a student just can't, or a group of kids can't or won't, because it implies that we believe then that they actually can't or that they won't. And then that if we continue to perseverate on that or have that same attitude when we're talking with each other, it leaks out in our communications with our students. It has a way of finding its way out, and then kids know that that's how we really feel. And I don't think teachers get into teaching to think poorly about their students.
I hope not.
It's a hard job. So we're there often because we care and we have skills to offer, but we have to make sure we're focused on using empathy in how we're relating to others with our shared students.
At the end of the day, it's a lot of coded language that we tend to utilize, which is very unfortunate, because at this point in the game, like a lot of stuff that we do say, like you said, those kids are low, or those kids, or those kind of things, we know exactly what you're talking about, and not just as an adult. We know what you're talking about, but the kids know what you're talking about as well. I've been in those staff meetings where, the data is on the board, and it's like based off of the data that I'm seeing, or based off of the conversation that's being held in those staff meetings. I mean, we know exactly which families they're talking about, or which neighborhood of folks that they're talking about, which school, and all those type of things. Those things are very, even though I'm not saying the actual words, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I agree. We definitely need to shift our language. So, okay, if we need to shift our language, what would be some alternative things that maybe we could say regarding our students, because naturally, yeah, there's some students that might need some additional support. But what type of language, like, give me some examples of what that could look like if we're shifting our language.
So a lot of the students I'm working with currently, like today was our first day of school with students. So I got to meet all of my new students in class. And a lot of kids present as socially like they have enough English, but academically they may not, which is why they're in our program. And we're working on closing some academic gaps,
Mhm.
which in many cases have been opportunity gaps. They haven't been offered curriculum that is the same as their same age peers. It's not as challenging, it's not as rigorous. So their academic skills didn't develop at the same pace. But we have to make sure we're using terms like, or just really focusing on what kids can do. Because it's hard to toss out terms because then people want to just use specific terms like it's
Mhm.
a checklist, like you mentioned before. And we don't want to do a checklist sort of thing like, yep, now you're set.
Yeah.
But we just want to make sure we're using words to describe kids that we would also use in front of them. So that's like we have to shift our mindset. I went on vacation once and we were in really cold water, and the guy leading us on this tubing trip was saying, well, if you guys say it's really cold and this is terribly uncomfortable, the Yelp reviews are awful and then I don't get paid. And I was like, hey, true. He's like,
Yeah.
you could think about it as refreshing, invigorating. And it's true. And it was actually refreshing and invigorating. And it didn't last all day. It was not freezing all day. But we have to think in terms of who's in front of us in this moment at this time, and how would I describe that student? And how would I have wanted someone to talk about me if I were that student at that age at that time? Because I'm used to working with high schoolers, and most high schoolers are somewhat insecure in different settings. So we have to think about how we would have wanted to be talked about in that space as well, and use terms we would want to have describe us at that age.
Yeah. I had a really great, like a really good conversation with Dr. Bridget Holloman. Shout out to Bridget Holloman, Dr. Bridget Holloman. She just finished her dissertation. So I want to put some respect on her name as well. So, but the conversation that we had today was, talking about, the power of words of affirmation with your students. And she talked about, she didn't say students. She doesn't refer to her kids as students. She calls all of them scholars, and how that just the students or the scholars hearing that scholars, scholars. And so when it got to the point where sometimes the kids will go to other teachers and the teachers will call them students, and they're like, no, I'm a scholar. And when you start hearing that and you're saying, I'm a scholar. And she said there was so much more success, and the kids were really more engaged, and they were really more involved in the classroom, and they felt like they could be scholars, or they could move on to the next level and go on to college, and those type of things, just from those simple words of affirmation and how that creates that mindset. There's that whole self-fulfilling prophecy stuff,
Mhm.
but it really creates that mindset that, no, I can do these things. But if we utilize, as educators, if we utilize negative terms, a deficit mindset, then no, see how that trickles into the content that we create and how we deliver that content and the expectations we have for our students, all those things. To me, I would just think just simple little things like that. And it sounds simple. It sucks that you even had to put this on the list. Like, empathy should be the first one that we're discussing. However, it is definitely needed these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. The challenge there is making sure you're carrying that empathy, I think, when you're talking with your colleagues,
Yeah,
because when we practice talking in positive frames about our students, then that will come across. Like we have a way to turn
absolutely.
it around with a refreshing perspective.
Well, I want to take a second real quick to add in shout out to Patty. Thanks for joining us, Patty, and for listening. I worked on a reservation out here in Idaho. Um, So shout out to Shoshone Bannock tribes out here, which this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna be spending. They have their annual event this weekend. So I'll be out there watching the powwows and just kind of fellowshipping. I really enjoy going out there, and it's been a while, so I'm looking forward to that. So shout out to Patty. Thank you for joining us. So Elissa, why don't you share with us the second strategy that you have?
Sure. The second one is working on developing trust with our students, and knowing this again comes from a place of working with high schoolers. Kids have been in school K-8 before they even walk in our doors. So they have had a historical experience with school, and we need to be mindful of that in our approach with them and know that building that trust takes time. So there's no like single day quick activity icebreaker that like, oh, they're good now, or oh, everyone gets along. So we have to know that it takes work and it takes trust and it takes a lot of time to build that. Um,
Why
so
is trust so important though? Like, give me a little bit more about that, because it sounds simple, but like,
mhm.
what could be some issues that would mean that there needs to be a little bit more trust?
So I think when kids have been my career experiences with kids that have been historically marginalized in their education.
Mm.
So when that has happened, kids don't walk in like ready to go. Even no matter how engaging my activity or my class might be, they can walk in and look at me and think, oh, another one. But kids also get the added bonus of like they look at my name on their schedule and they're not necessarily sure that they're in the right
Mhm.
room because my name doesn't match my face. So I have to address that right away. Like, yep, I am. Mrs. Gong, come on in. You're in the right space. Um, so we have to work with kids in their academic strengths. Like, what can they do? What do they know? Rather than focusing on what could be easier to see is the things that they can't do. So if a kid surprises me with, okay, I did not see that coming. That's not how I thought they were going to respond to this question or this lab prompt. I have to look at like, okay, but what did they provide? And how do I know, okay, I see your train of thinking and then know how to push them further. Because if we're going to work to close any existing academic gaps, then we have to be a trusting person. They have to be wanting to come on that journey with us, and they have to feel like this is a safe place to do so.
Yeah.
If the expectations are high and I were to come across cold, they're not going to step into that boat with me.
I think all of that's, foundational when it comes to relationship building in general. Sometimes, I've had conversations with teachers and they say, I don't understand. I can't figure out the certain students in my class, or the majority of my kids, it seems to be no issue, but there's just a handful that I'm still working on. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I let them know, well, how is your relationship with them? Okay, so outside of the books, outside of math class, what type of relationship do you have with your students? And if they tell me I really don't have a relationship
Mhm.
outside of the academic side, then I say, you know what, that's something that we can work towards so that we can help build it. And part of that building comes to relationships is the trust, right?
Mhm.
If a child does not trust you, then it's gonna be kind of tough when it comes to building those relationships. So and you have to consider, and you and I talked about this the other day, it's just you have to consider the importance of, you're not the first teacher that they have had. And some of our students have had some negative experiences with prior educators, or maybe they just had some issues with school in general. And so it just takes a little bit of time to build. I know I've worked in some communities where the conversation is, how long are you going to be here?
Mhm.
The kids are just used to seeing turnover. They're used to seeing a new teacher every semester or every year. They don't have that continuity. And so as a result, you come in or they walk into your classroom and that's the first question that comes up is, how long will you be here?
Mhm.
Because I'm not going to really open up to you if I don't think you're going to stay that long. So I just think those little things are so important when it comes to developing that trust. And we have to consider the historical pieces to why some folks may not trust their teacher.
Mhm. My favorite way to start, and this one I feel badly, I can't remember where I learned this. This was not originally my idea. It's called a 2 by 10, where you
Yeah.
take some, a kid that's maybe not engaged, they're having a hard time, whatever it may be, talk to
Mhm.
them for 2 minutes about anything, 10 days in a row, like 10 school days in a row. And then it really changes things. And then you move
Yeah.
on to your next kid, or maybe you talk to two every day to get more 2x10s done. This is perhaps the me that really likes the science and the data and counting things. But we have to humanize science and getting to know kids in different capacities.
Humanize science. I love that because I get folks math and science. They'll come up to me, oh, how can I be coach responsive with math and science, or especially in math? People say, how
Mhm.
can I be coach responsive with math? I say, there's plenty of ways to do it. It's just not formulas. I mean, some folks believe, it's math. It's either 2 + 2 = 4. How do I make that coach responsive? And I say, can you create a word problem that is relevant to your students?
Mhm.
Johnny walks down Johnny has 2 video games and his friend comes over and brings 2 more video games. And how many do they have? But the problem is sometimes we rely on those question banks and that's it. We don't go beyond that. But yeah, sometimes we do have to make some tweaks in order
Mhm.
to create those word problems that are going to be relevant to our students. You can do that in math. But
Absolutely.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And that's word problems are a major barrier for kids acquiring English too, because they
Mm.
may have seen a word. I even did it once as a mistake last year. I was doing population genetics in class and I wrote about a pen, like how many heterozygous pigs are here and there, and the farmer needs this many in their pen. I
Oh.
wrote the word pen. My students were used to seeing pen as a writing utensil,
Mm.
and I gave them the synonym of fence. So small things like that, if they weren't comfortable speaking with me during an assessment, they wouldn't have been able to answer the question. But then that's on me as the person who wrote a bad question that wasn't understandable to all my students.
Yeah, and you meant well, right? And
I
and like you
did.
said,
I
your students,
straightened it out. But yeah.
and
But
that's
we
and that's another thing, right? That's part of that empathy that we were talking about. Just like, hey, no, you know what? You're right. I messed up. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Those type of things, and that's how you build the trust. I mean, so
Mhm.
all of that makes sense. So I'm glad that you're willing. Not all of us are willing to be vulnerable in those type of situations and be
Mhm.
like, you know what? You're right. My bad. So thank you for that. Speaking of, let's move on to number 3. Why don't you share with us what your third strategy is today?
So my third one is to avoid the saviorism mindset. So as important as it is to have trust and relationships, all good things, we're not here as educators to save or to fix kids, because the kids are not broken.
Mm.
So we're not, and this is especially when the groups of students in your classroom may not reflect, what you look like or your lived experiences. um, it if Some people are tempted to be too nice and like over scaffold work, make it easier, um, and kind of like, well, they don't have to do this part because it's too hard, or I don't know if they're going to get it. But then we're lowering the bar academically, which is a really dangerous road to
Mm.
walk down, because that makes us complicit as their teacher who's supposed to help them. We're complicit then in leaving them behind. And then we're marginalizing further. So it's a very dangerous piece. So we're not saving kids by saving them from doing work. So it's absolutely essential that we keep our standards high, we keep the work rigorous. But in doing so, we have to do those first two things where we have um, an empathetic lens talking about our students to keep our mindset in check, and developing trust with them so that they're comfortable and willing and they see themselves as academically focused, or
Scholars.
cognitively able. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Ken Williams. He talks about complicity
Hmm.
when it comes to that's the number one enemy of equity is complicity. And shout out to him in the work that he's doing. But sadly, and I'm not going to name any organizations, but there are some certain organizations that are out there that, uh, you know, you can get your loans paid back. You go into those quote unquote rough schools, spend a couple years there, and you can get your loans paid back. Some educators, especially those educators who may not look or reflect the demographics that they're going to be serving. They go into these schools, and again, they spend a couple years there, and then they're out. And then, like you said, there's another piece where there's educators that will come in and say, have the mindset of, I'm doing charity work.
Mhm.
I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going in. Listen, I'll tell you one, and I've said this a few times, but when I say, hey, I work on a reservation, sometimes locally in town, people will tell me, oh, bless your heart. It must be tough out there. It must be rough. And I say, no, it's not. And I actually get treated better out there than I get treated in town. Don't talk about my kids. Have you been out to the reservation? If not, I don't really want to hear it. You're just going off of whatever stereotype you think is available out there. But if I came into that community with that mindset that, oh yeah, I heard about the kids out here on the reservation. I heard that this school is a rough school, and then I try to serve the school in a way that's, again, for my good, give myself a pat on the back and those type of things, then that's the wrong approach, and I would never survive in that type of a community with that mindset.
Mhm.
So I agree. Like the saviorism is, I mean, we see it in movies.
Mhm.
Uh, we
It's
see
a
it in
great
movies.
plot line in movies, but it's really a dangerous concept.
Dangerous minds, yes.
Yes.
So it's a dangerous concept.
Mhm.
I remember reading an article. Speaking of, like, I remember reading an article. You remember the movie Blindside?
I
Uh,
haven't seen it,
with
but
Michael Orr.
I'm familiar with the
Okay,
story, yeah.
so there's this black kid who's has some family situations, rough situation. A white family picks him up, adopts him, and then basically ends up going to the NFL. That's in a nutshell. But I remember reading an article where he said he hated that movie. Like it's a show. The movie's about him, but he hates the movie because he didn't like the way he was portrayed in the
Mm,
movie and how it was framed. So we see those type of things in movies. We see it in media. However, I've spoken about it so many times. I don't think that's the right approach when we're coming into a community feeling that it is our duty to save someone, as if they haven't. I always say these communities, these families have been surviving before you got here, and they will
mhm,
survive after you leave.
mhm,
It is not because of you
mhm,
that you didn't you avoided jail or you're dead or whatever you got into drug because I spent the time. No, so I think that's honestly, Elissa, I might even say that this might even be one of it should be maybe a little higher up on the list, just the more I think about it. But I know we're not in order. I know we're not going in any particular order, but I think it's really important. I mean, what do
mhm.
you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you because the key there is, I mean, that's really what good teaching and in some ways being a good person is about, is
Mhm.
teaching you can help people see like the good in themselves, but
Yeah.
you're not creating that good. You're not putting it there. You're maybe helping a kid or encouraging a kid to see their potential, but it's their potential. It's not yours as the teacher.
I remember I was working with a community, and I made a mistake. I'll be honest. One time, I said, the work that I was telling a staff member, I said, the work that you're doing, I bet it feels very rewarding to you. And she checked me right then. She said, "No, this is not rewarding. This is work that needs to be done." And she helped me on my language because I was thinking from this is a rewarding thing. You get the opportunity, that kind of a mindset. And she really was like, "That's not what this is for me.
Mhm,
This is my community. A lot of the people that I'm working with, they reflect the same background that I have. This is not a reward. This is not this is I've had people along the way that have helped me get to where I'm at, and I want to be able to give back. I want to be able to support the community that I'm from. And this is not I don't want that, I don't want you to think that that's what this is about. So, I've done it before, but I think it's really important that, yeah, we keep in mind, again, people have been doing their thing. They have been surviving, whatever that looks like, way before we came, and it's not our responsibility to save. Now, let me ask you this. All right, going back to the whole, okay, well, what can we do instead? All right,
mhm,
because I know that we do. The reality is there, especially with COVID and even before COVID, there are families that might be having some tough time. There might be some students that are dealing with some challenges.
Mhm.
And if we don't want to approach things from a savioristic mindset or approach, how would you suggest maybe some strategies in that sense of, okay, I want to help, but I don't want to just assume that they need my help. So how would you maybe address those type of things?
I think we'd have to ask,
Mhm.
especially if, there's some clear indicators perhaps that, maybe a family could use the free and reduced lunch application. Um, Maybe they need help logging on to their child's school, whatever your school uses for grades, or like our school does some gift cards around the holidays so that people can buy extra food, buy some clothes or new shoes. But we can ask a family, how can we help? Like we have some funds available. What would be helpful to you? Would you like help? Would be
Mm.
another good one, a good way to start, because maybe they don't want the help. And that's okay. It's their family, it's their life. Um, there were some kids last year that I bought some of the gift cards for, and I knew in advance who needed them. And I knew the girls really wanted lip gloss.
Mm.
And I knew some of the dads were having a hard time getting to work. So I bought makeup, like for a local makeup location, a store near here, and gas station gift cards. And those were disseminated to the families. They didn't
Yeah.
know it came from me. Um, but it's helpful to ask, do you want help, and what kind of help would be useful to you? Because it could easily be construed as like some kind of negative charity. I dropped off gift cards at one student's house and talked with a family member who said, well, we're not poor and we don't actually, and she had recently taken in multiple children into her home that were not her children. So I said, it's a gesture that, knowing that your grocery bill has increased dramatically, taking in several teenagers, we're grateful that they have a safe place to be and that they're fed and they're cared for. Um, so
How
being
did
able,
you take it when they said, "Hey, we're not poor," or, her response? I mean, how did it make you like, what were your thoughts when she
well,
responded
I
that way?
immediately thought like, we did not do our homework here to know, like, does she want any help? Because we didn't ask.
Mm.
We assumed that some extra grocery gift cards would be helpful.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was offensive to her. And she wound up being really grateful, and she's a person I can still communicate with to this day about the needs of the students she cares for. Um, but initially that could have gone in a very different
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. So, and again, that's just a lesson learned.
Mhm.
I always, and just like what you said, I always tell people, just ask. Just say, "Hey, listen, I overheard something, or I noticed you say something, or I noticed Johnny's shoes have a few holes in them. Is there anything I can do to support? Because I do have a connection, or I got to get my kids a pair of shoes. I mean, would you have a problem if I got Johnny a pair of shoes as well?" Like those type of things, as opposed to showing up at Johnny's house with the pair of shoes, or when Johnny comes to school, "Hey, throw those away. Put these on now. I hooked you up." I think just asking
Mhm.
can go so far, uh, but sometimes we just assume that we already know what someone needs or the
Mhm.
resources because we might have access to them, and we just automatically assume, and that's where things can go the wrong direction.
Mhm.
So okay, so I'm gonna run down the list one more time and make sure I didn't miss anything. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the first point, when it comes to strategies for working with students that are different than you, working with diverse population, if you do not look or share the same background and demographics of the current population that you're working with, that you're serving with in that community, the first one we had was having an empathetic lens. Number two was developing trust. And number three is avoiding the saviorism complex. What would be number four?
Number four, we want to approach everything with an asset based
Mm.
lens. So similar to that first one, where when you're talking with your colleagues and check the words you're using and the mindset you're exhibiting with people.
Mhm.
Um, We want to, when we're sitting with the kids, like working with the kids or talking to the kids, providing feedback, a retake, a redo, whatever it is, we want to look at what can they do and communicate that to the student. So I've had students sit in my class like, I can't. And then we have to flip it around and, okay, so show me what part you can do. Tell me what your thoughts are on this part. Or that's an interesting idea. How did you approach it? So something that puts them in control, puts them in the driver's seat of whatever they're supposed to be doing or learning, and looking at it from an asset, something good that they can bring, something that they're on the right track or something of that nature.
Now, do you believe that when we come from a deficit mindset, folks might lower their standards in regards to their approach? So, I don't, like you said, I don't think this child can do it. And so we give them easier work, or we don't really challenge them. Is that kind of what you mean as well?
Yeah, it definitely could lead to reduced workloads or different tasks. I had several students in my class today that they don't know any English yet, but it's yet, they still did the lab. They showed me what they could do. So we worked on the metric system today. They could use all the implements and they could tell me then, oh, yes, the bigger one or the smaller one, or yes or no. But just by shaking their heads, they didn't have the vocabulary, gesturing bigger, smaller, but they knew, and it allowed me to see what they did know rather than, well, it could be that a teacher could look at a student like, well, they can't communicate with me in English, so I'll just have them do this other thing on the computer, or I guess I just can't work with them. So we've got to stay engaged with our kids no matter what they're presenting us with, and make sure we're looking at the assets and the things that they can do and the gifts that they do have, and use that as a stepping stone for where to go next.
I've seen teachers where, for example, let's say it's students where English, Spanish might be their first language, and I've seen teachers have the Spanish English dictionary or utilize Google Translate. Try to speak to them in their language, even if Spanish is I guess Spanish is their second language in that case for the teacher side. But I think that's important. At least they're trying, and sometimes we just get to that. This is America, learn the language type of mindset, and it's just not fair to our kids if that's the approach that you take. I've heard that. So if folks are saying, "Oh no, teachers surely wouldn't say anything," I literally have heard teachers say that.
Same.
So it happens, and so if that's the mindset that you're having, then first of all, you shouldn't be in the classroom. You shouldn't be in front of students. I mean, let's start there. However, that's that deficit mindset. Even when, let me ask you this, okay? So outside of language, what if a student's reading scores are aren't at grade level, or math at the same time, those type of things? What are some of the suggestions that you have in those type of situations?
So there's still got to be background knowledge that the child does have, something that they do know, and we can work from there. We don't want to, oftentimes those things come with different layers that students need to learn. So, no one's going to take calculus if they haven't taken other forms of math before, been successful, learned the essentials of algebra and geometry and trigonometry. So we can't pretend that those things don't matter, but there's got to be a starting place. So, so students maybe are not using positive and negative numbers accurately, then we've got to start there and then combine it with algebra. There's got to be multiple on-ramps to allow them to work with their same age peers with cognitively challenging material to allow them to grow. But there's got to be a place to start with something they do know to make it less daunting, because it can't seem impossible, or a student's not going to continue to think, or it's because it's overwhelming.
Absolutely. Now, I would say this when it comes to asset-based lens, and I talk a lot about it. There's several different strategies, such as hip hop education. There is project-based learning. There's what else do we have? We have just anything culturally responsive, I believe, would be considered asset-based. But we definitely want to avoid any sort of self-fulfilling prophecies, any type of stereotype threats. Our role as educators is, again, to promote positive affirmation. And again, I shout out to Dr. Holloman. I had a really good conversation with her this morning, and she just really kept emphasizing the importance of referring to your students, your kids, as scholars, was just a primary example. I mean, her whole dissertation, her research and everything all involved that type of language, and just being able to look at, like you said, okay, where are you at right now? Okay, let's take you where you are right now and let's build from there. I just saw an article not too long ago regarding the learning loss stuff. I think
Mhm.
learning loss, that whole conversation is just a deficit frame.
Mhm.
And I saw it a lot last year, and then the year before that when pandemic first hit, and I'm still seeing that conversation about learning loss, achievement gap, and all these type of conversations, again, from a deficit frame. So I definitely agree we should change our mindset and change the way that we're speaking or referring to our kids and looking at our kids. So thank you
Mhm.
for that. Now, we got 4. We'll run it down one more time. Have an empathetic lens, have trust, avoid the saviorism, asset-based lens. Elissa, I think, the folks out there deserve at least one more. Can you dig into the vault? Can you pull into the crates? Is there at least one more? Can we round it up to 5?
Yes, I think as educators, especially when we're working with students that maybe do not match us in whatever way we're referring to, it's really important to be authentic. So there's no magical like icebreaker or way to enter, exit a room that's going to make every kid blend with their teacher. So it's important as educators that we remain vulnerable too.
Mm.
I had a container of pipetters and I dropped all the pipette tips all over the floor. But it's vulnerability because I trip on things sometimes too. So, kids helped me clean them up. But it's important that when we're working with our students, we allow students to be seen and heard. Um, we don't know it all, and we never will because
Yeah.
technology changes rapidly. And I will, working with all the students I work with, I will never know what it's like to be in their shoes 100% of the time. I can hear commonalities among different groups of my students, but it's not the same. I haven't actually walked in those shoes and I haven't actually lived that experience. I can speak multiple languages, but I'm not going to know all of them, of all my students that come through my door. So it's imperative that as we're trying to be authentic and we're trying to be trustworthy and build those relationships, that we also build a sense of belonging by asking students to tell us about themselves and share things about ourselves, because we're not perfect. We're not done. We can always continue to learn and grow. I think that vulnerability is a big deal there in being
Yeah,
authentic.
that's part of being authentic, right? Um, you know, we ask our kids to tell us about okay, for your journal prompt, if you were to, if you were to on an island, what would, we ask these questions where some of those questions can be very vulnerable. Now, and
Mhm.
and sometimes our teachers read them. Sometimes the journals are private, and the kids, just kind of doing it for their own. Just the teacher would just see if they finished or not, if they just wrote, but they're not reading the journals. But sometimes we ask our students to open up and share with us. Going back to the whole conversation initially where we were talking about trust, we don't do the same thing,
Mhm.
and we wonder why. Oh, I don't understand why I don't have the relationship, why I don't have that trust, or why I don't have these things. Or on the other side, we have teachers who will try to do handshakes and high fives and rap or dance to the latest dance moves on TikTok, try to do all these things that they wouldn't normally do on their own time.
Right. Well, that's
So
the thing. If they don't
Mhm.
normally do it,
Yeah.
it comes across to kids as really insincere and kind of
Mhm.
bizarre. Like, what are you doing? This is not you. Like, they know. They know. If it's what you normally do
Yeah.
anyway, then you do you. Like, that's
Yeah.
fine because then you're being your authentic self. But
Yeah.
that's not going to be the thing that suddenly like keys in a bunch of kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I see that a lot. And like you said, the kids will look at you. I've seen kids straight up like pretend like they're on your side, like they're, oh yeah, keep going, yeah, yeah. And then the camera's up and they're secret, kids will clown you.
Hmm.
So I think it's really important to really be authentic. And I've always been one of those individuals who likes to joke around with my kids, and I have a great time. And we'll do we'll do your mama jokes, we'll roast each other, we'll have the whole sessions. And because when kids start to try to roast me, I say, oh, you want to go right now? We could do this right now. I'll do a 10-minute stand-up comedy on you right now. I'll be ready to go. So I'm always loaded. So but it's fun. But that's who I am. That's what I like to do. That I'm not putting on a show. I'm not pretending to be somebody that I'm not. And I think we can connect with our kids however we need to connect, in our own way. And even when situations, again, going back to the conversation about if you reflect different than your students and you say, well, I'm not into hip hop, or I'm not into this rock band, or I'm not into whatever it is, but you can learn about those things. It doesn't mean that you have to try to write lyrics and all those things, but you can ask questions. And going back to you gave a great example about the 2x10, just sitting there and just learning from your students, and letting them tell you. I didn't know anything about powwows. I didn't know any of things about the category, but the kids were really into it. And so I started asking questions. Tell me about the different categories. Okay, so I noticed that the outfit that you had on looked different than some of the other categories. Tell me about that. And then just sit there and listen to them go and learn from our kids. But if we aren't doing those type of things, then we're not really being authentic. So, yeah. Now, I'm going to throw out if there are any questions out there. So feel free. We're going to wrap things up. Folks, if you have a question for Elissa, man, I am doing my best, but I'm sorry I've been butchering your name, but it's definitely something I'm working on. So thank you for your patience on that. But folks, if you have some questions, feel free to pop them in. And then we'll just kind of start wrapping things up. Did you have any final thoughts, any final words that we haven't touched on that you want to add to the conversation?
I don't have anything totally different. But I just think it's a constant process, and especially considering, wherever maybe we grew up or what experiences we had in childhood, it's different for everybody. And just acknowledging that is okay. But we're all capable of learning. You show that you learned a lot about kids on a reservation, and as long as we're willing to ask our students and learn from them in a sincere way that they know that we care and we're listening, that also builds that trust and builds that relationship. So always be ready for that.
Always be ready. Now, if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what are the best ways to reach you online?
Educationally, I'm on Twitter a lot. So my handle's here, ticking it across the bottom of the screen. But in case you're listening, it's at Elissa_Gong.
All right. Well, Elissa, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really a privilege.
My honor. My honor. Well, folks, final thoughts real quick. By the way, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy the live stream, I'm trying to build up the channel. So if you enjoyed the live stream, please subscribe. What do they say? Smash that like button, subscribe button, follow me. That means a lot. If you listen to the show, the regular podcast on Mondays via audio, we appreciate that as well. But feel free to share the content. It's helpful, and we really do appreciate it. My final, I'm running down real quick. She said, empathetic lens, trust, avoid saviorism, have an asset-based lens, and be authentic. I mean, sounds simple, but it's something that we can all work on. And I have not been perfect myself. It's not something that I don't believe that you have arrived. I believe that it's a journey that we're all taking and we're all working towards, and that's really important. So feel free to shoot me an email, follow. There is the Twitter handle down there for Elissa is right there. Make sure that you follow her as well. Now, remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.